Hello again, Connecting Points. So here we are in week 3 of our study on Esther here. So a quick summary of our story so far. We've seen Esther chosen as the Queen of Persia, and she was chosen as a replacement for Queen Vashti, who had offended King Xerxes. Mordecai had overheard and reported news of an assassination attempt on Xerxes. But somehow he was not rewarded for this great act of service to the king. And then last week we saw Haman, who was promoted to second in command in the entire empire, but he took offense to Mordecai, who did not give Haman the honor he felt he was due. Now, taking it to the extreme, Haman decrees that Mordecai and all the Jews be killed for this slight. This resulted in a lot of confusion, again, of course for the Jews, but for everybody in the capital city. So, now this news had bypassed Esther altogether, and it wasn't until Esther heard that Mordecai was lying in sackcloth and ashes that she started to inquire about the cause. And as Mordecai explained the situation, he made it very clear that this death decree was for her as well, and suggested that she'd speak to the king. Now, Esther had to make a hard decision at this point. To do nothing meant that she would die with all the other Jews. To go to the king was also a death sentence, but there was a chance that the king would see her and permit her to live. Going to the king was a deliberate choice for Esther to identify herself with the people of God. She would have to reveal the secret of her Jewish roots in an effort to save her people. So let's look at chapter 5 and see what happens next and what she does. So here we go. On the 3rd day, Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the palace in front of the king's hall. The king was sitting on his royal throne in the hall, facing the entrance. When he saw Queen Esther standing in the court, he was pleased with her and held out to her the gold scepter that was in his hand. So Esther approached and touched the tip of the scepter. Then the king asked, "What is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom it will be given to you." "If it pleases the king," replied Esther, "let the king, together with Haman, come today to a banquet that I have prepared for him." "Bring Haman at once," the king said, "so that we may do what Esther asks." So the king and Haman went to the banquet Esther had prepared. As they were drinking wine, the king again asked Esther, "Now, what is your petition?" "It will be given to you. And what is your request? Even up to half the kingdom it will be granted." Esther replied, "My petition and my request is this: if the king regards me with favor, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and fulfill my request, let the king and Haman come tomorrow to the banquet I will prepare for them. Then I will answer the king's question." So Esther, she plays this really well. The first thing she does is puts on her royal robes and finds a place outside the throne room where Xerxes can see her. The robes show us that she is using the full force of her royal position. Now remember, at this point, she doesn't know how the story is going to turn out. Standing outside the throne room, unsummoned, was a dangerous place to be. To approach the king without such a summons was punishable by death, unless the king chose to allow the offender an audience. She was willing to take that chance. It turns out to be a good decision, since the king sees her and invites her in. So Esther also knows how the king's court works. It's an area of absolute rule by the king that is highly influenced by a bunch of insecure advisors. Their insecurities and shortfallings drive them to make irrational choices. Haman's death decree is based on the fact that he did not think Mordecai gave him enough reverence. Esther knows it and plays a political game which arouses curiosity in the king and in Haman. She hopes to build up the emotions until there is no way out of the accusations she is about to bring against Haman. She's setting up the king so he can see the true consequences of Haman's decree. She is setting up Haman to relax and miss the warning signs of what is about to happen. It appears Haman is quite relaxed and sees no danger on the horizon. And we see this as we read the next section here. So Haman went out that day happy and in good spirits. But when he saw Mordecai at the king's gate and observed that he neither rose nor showed fear in his presence, he was filled with rage against Mordecai. Nevertheless, Haman restrained himself and went home. Calling together his friends and Zeresh his wife, Haman boasted to them about his vast wealth, his many sons, and all the ways the king had honored him, and how he had elevated him above all the other nobles and officials. And that's not all, Haman added. I am the only person Queen Esther invited to accompany the king to the banquet she gave. And she invited me along with the king tomorrow. But all this gives me no satisfaction as long as I see that Jew Mordecai sitting at the king's gate. His wife Zeresh and all his friends said to him, have a pole set up reaching to a height of 50 cubits, and ask the king in the morning to have Mordecai impaled on it. Then go with the king to the banquet and enjoy yourself. This suggestion delighted Haman, and he set the pole up. So how do you know someone thinks very highly of himself? Well, believe me, they will tell you. So this is exactly what Haman does. He goes home and tells his family and friends about how much money he has, how great his family is, and how great his job is. He also thinks he's special because he has been invited to dine with the queen. Esther has played this well. He has no clue as to what is about to happen. Through all his bragging, he still mopes about Mordecai. He is consumed by the disrespect that he feels he has received from him. Why is it that his money and position and family is not enough? Haman gets his self-worth from these trappings and cannot understand when others look to another source for meaning. In his mind, this diminishes his accomplishments. He is addicted to the power and prestige of the position. Now, this is a recognizable pattern in our leaders today. They travel the world in their private jets and then say that you and I are the problem when we put gas in our car to go to work. They eat their grand meals and tell us that meat is ruining the environment and we should be eating crickets. In fact, they've even been telling us that by 2030, you will own nothing and you will be happy. They're not hypocrites. They simply think they are better than us, and their elite status gives them the right to rule over us. Now I want to point out one last humorous detail. So when Haman moans about Mordecai, his wife comes up with a solution. Just get it done, she says. Kill him already. Whatever happened to the decree that we saw in chapter 1 that says the man of the household is supposed to be the man of the household? In this passage, it's Haman's wife who is advising him what to do. She's the one coming up with the solutions to his distress. He is unable to do it himself. So Zeresh suggests that Haman raise up a 75-foot pole and ask the king for permission to impale Mordecai on the pole first thing in the morning. Now this signals the end of the road for Mordecai. He now has hours left to live. But let's continue on with chapter 6. That night the king could not sleep, so he ordered the book of the Chronicles, the record of its reign, to be brought in and read to him. It was found recorded there that Mordecai had exposed Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's officers who guarded the doorway, who had conspired to assassinate King Xerxes. What honor and recognition has Mordecai received for this? The king asked. Nothing has been done for him, his attendants had answered. The king said, "Who is in the court?" Now Haman had just entered the outer court of the palace to speak to the king about impaling Mordecai on the pole he had set up for him. His attendants answered, "Haman is in the court." "Bring him in," the king ordered. When Haman entered, the king asked him, "What should be done for the man the king delights to honor?" Now Haman thought to himself, "Who is there that the king would rather honor than me?" So he answered the king, "For the man the king delights to honor, have them bring a royal robe the king has worn, and a horse the king has ridden, one with a royal crest placed on its head. Then let the robe and horse be entrusted to one of the king's most noble princes. Let them robe the man the king delights to honor, and lead him on the horse through the city streets, proclaiming before him, 'This is what is done for the man the king delights to honor.' Go at once," the king commanded Haman. "Get the robe and the horse, and do just as you suggested for Mordecai, and lead him on the horseback through the city streets, proclaiming before him, 'This is what is done for the man who the king delights to honor.'" Afterwards, Mordecai returned to the king's gate, but Haman rushed home with his head covered in grief and told Zeresh and all his friends everything that had happened to him. His advisors and his wife Zeresh said to him, "Since Mordecai, before whom your downfall has started, is of Jewish origin, you cannot stand against him. You will surely come to ruin." While they were still talking with him, the king's eunuchs arrived and hurried Haman away to the banquet Esther had prepared. Now no one could have predicted that Xerxes would wake up early in the morning and in his restlessness ask for story time. Now what better story is there than a story about himself? Now what are the chances that the book would open to the story of the day Mordecai saved his life by exposing an assassination plot? This account is read mere minutes before the unsuspecting Haman walks in to request the death of Mordecai. Now this is the most important piece of our understanding of providence. Esther had set up the table but has not yet spoken of her concern. She has her plan and an intent to expose Haman. Yet the turnaround of fortunes for Mordecai cannot be attributed to Esther. Mordecai is exalted because the king could not sleep, and the book of Persian tales opens up to remind him of Mordecai's great service, saving the king's life. No one planned this, and no one had control over this. This is the work of providence, and the timing is absolutely perfect. Now while this is all happening, Haman is riding his donkey into town with a request for the king to kill Mordecai. But the king has already chosen to promote Mordecai for his service. Now as the story stands, Esther has set up the king to see the evil that Haman has planned for the Jews. Esther has set up Haman to be a willing participant in the banquet that will be his last meal on earth. Haman has set up his plan to impale Mordecai. Providence has set up King Xerxes to have Mordecai in his mind by taking away his sleep and having the scroll open to the time Mordecai saved his life. As a result, the king chooses to exalt Mordecai and asks Haman to do the honoring seconds before he can ask for the right to kill Mordecai. Now, is this a coincidence? Is it a miracle? It's very easy for us to look around it's very easy for us to look at this and to attribute it to the hand of God. He tweaked the controls of life by a small little margin, and now Mordecai is paraded around town in royal regalia on the king's horse. On top of that, it is Haman who has to shout it out for all to hear. What a huge change of events. Now we all know of the miraculous events of the Bible that makes it so unique. The parting of the Red Sea, the manna in the desert, the falling of the walls of Jericho. They look very spectacular to us, but they all could have happened through natural events. The Red Sea has documented cases of winds drying out large areas of land that is normally underwater. I understand that there are trees in the area that ooze out their sap and it becomes a sweet white flake that tastes delicious, much like the manna in Exodus. The walls of Jericho could have fallen in an earthquake. And I'm not trying to put any doubt in the miracles in any way. After all, what are the chances of an earthquake destroying Jericho after the Israelites walked around the city 7 times and only moments after the flutes start playing their worship music? Now these events are easily ascribed to God. What do we make of a king that cannot sleep? This is a little harder to ascribe to the hand of God. The Old Testament was filled with miracles and people doing unnatural feats and angel armies coming to their aid. But life does not look like that to us. There is a mystery that we have to live with where we do not get the answers we need. We do not get sudden glorious victories. We get restless nights that change our lives. This may be why the Bible tells us to remember the miracles of old. This is all we get when we need to trust God when times get tough. And don't forget, the Israelites who did see the parting of the Red Sea were complaining about 5 minutes later, forgetting that God had saved them several times, bringing them out of Egypt and opening up the seas when they had no escape from a bloodthirsty army intent on recapturing their slaves. But what God did before, he can do again. So this leads us to another table talk. So remember that the king's sleepless night preceded his meeting with Haman, who would ask for the right to impale Mordecai. The real work of providence did not show up until exactly when it was needed. There was no time left for Mordecai, and the king could not sleep. So the question is, have you ever experienced God exactly when you needed it? Did it show up right in time? Did you worry for a time and then see your help come at the last moment? Okay, well, hopefully that stirred some conversation. So getting back to Haman, he is totally clueless. He walks into his meeting with Xerxes with one thing on his mind. The king has the total opposite idea in his mind. Haman is blind to the reality sitting right before him. How can the head of state and the second in command be so far apart on this issue? Haman thought he knew how to play the game, but the rules just changed overnight. And this will cost him his life. Imagine the revulsion he must have felt when he finally clued in that Xerxes was not wishing to congratulate himself, but Mordecai. Imagine the disgust when he learns that he has to do the honoring. He has to ride around town behind the man he has devoted his life to destroying and tell the city how great Mordecai is. Somehow Haman makes it through and goes home. His wife tells him to get out now. She sees a great danger and warns Haman. There is a difference between the 2 times Zeresh gives advice. The first time she says, get it over with and kill Mordecai. Second time she warns Haman to stop because Mordecai is a Jew. Now I don't quite understand why it is that she's so fearful of his ethnicity at this time. She knew he was a Jew when she gave the advice the first time. But either way, Haman follows the bad advice to kill Mordecai and ignores the good advice to leave him alone. He walks right into his downfall. So moving on to chapter 7. So the king and Haman went to Queen Esther's banquet. And as they were drinking wine on the second day, the king asked again, Queen Esther, what is your petition? It will be given to you. What is your request? Even up to half your kingdom, it will be granted. Then Queen Esther answered, I have found favor with you, your majesty, and if it pleases you, grant me my life. This is my petition, and spare my people. This is my request. For I and my people have been sold to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated. If we were merely being sold as male and female slaves, I would have kept silent, because no such distress would justify disturbing the king. King Xerxes asked Queen Esther, who is he? Where is he? The man who has dared to do such a thing. Esther said, an adversary and an enemy, this vile Haman. Then Haman was terrified before the king and the queen. The king got up in a rage, left his wine, and went out to the palace garden. But Haman, realizing that the king had already decided his fate, stayed behind to beg Queen Esther for his life. Just as the king returned from the palace garden to the banquet hall, Haman was falling on the couch where Esther was reclining. The king exclaimed, will he even molest the queen while she is with me in the house? As soon as the word left the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. Then Harbona, one of the eunuchs attending the king, said, a pole reaching to a height of 50 cubits stands by Haman's house. He had it set up for Mordecai, who spoke up to help the king. The king said, impale him on it. So they impaled Haman on the pole he had set up for Mordecai. Then the king's fury subsided. So Esther played her hand really well. She sets up the king and Haman in a way that demands a response. It's very reminiscent of Nathan confronting David after he took Bathsheba and killed her husband. Nathan told a story that tugged at the heart of David and then dropped a truth bomb that hit David hard. Esther has demonstrated the danger to his subjects and shown that the danger is also directed towards herself. And for the first time in this story, she publicly identifies herself as a member of the people of God. This is a great risk for her. The death decree given earlier was made with the king's signet ring, which was considered irrevocable. This is now death for Esther or death for Haman. I wonder if the king even thought about the earlier decree. How can he now overrule it? Was he going to be able to stop the killing? In his anger, Xerxes leaves the room, and when he returns, he finds Haman begging for his life on the couch with Esther. To approach a member of the king's harem was a death sentence in itself. Now, I don't know if Xerxes thought about the previous death decree, but Haman's approach to Esther is an opportunity for Xerxes to bypass this dilemma. Immediately, he orders Haman to be impaled for molesting his wife. And in a great twist of fate, Haman gets the death he deserves, but not for the crimes he committed. He did not plot to kill the queen. He did not violate her either. Esther gets the desired effect. For now, Mordecai has been saved, and there is still time to make a plan for Adar the 14th, the day the Jews are to be killed. One minute Haman is sitting down to dinner, and the next Esther is telling the king that Haman wants her and all her countrymen dead. He is immediately impaled on the giant poles that he had set up for Mordecai. Now this is a common event in the Bible. The enemies of God are killed by their own weapons. I remember that David killed Goliath by chopping off his head using Goliath's sword. Jesus instructed us that one cannot plunder the strong man's house unless the strong man is first bound up. And that's exactly what Jesus did. He bound up and defeated the enemy using Satan's primary weapon, which is death. Christ won the ultimate victory over the ultimate enemy of our souls. So I'm going to talk about providence one last time here. So we see the miracle of Christ's death, and because of 2,000 years of thought, we understand that God moved in a supernatural way. But I wonder if those who experienced this as it happened saw it that way. The story kind of reads a lot like everyday life to me. The Pharisees would have looked at Jesus as a problem, and they needed to deal with it. It would be completely natural for them to think that someone who claims to be God should be stopped. How could they possibly conceive that God himself was dwelling among them? The disciples would have been quite confused and scared. They would have looked at this and seen the power of the ruling class coming down hard on Jesus. I'm convinced that they would not have understood at the time that God had complete control of the situation. And this was the plan even before Jesus created the universe. God having control is an absolute necessity for providence to work. He must know and understand all of the billions of choices made by mankind every second of the day. He has to be able to have his input and at the same time completely respect the free will of everyone. We are fully responsible for the evil that we commit, but God turns it to his salvation. We feel the burden of oppressive regimes and corporations. He sees the evils in plain sight, and he sees the evils in the back rooms, hidden out of sight. And the history of the world culminates with mankind finally seeing the evil trap that has been set up for us and realizing that he, Jesus, God, is our only hope. God will come and put an end to Haman only when we are ready to look to God for our salvation. When all peoples of all nations are ready to turn to Jesus and renew covenant living with him, he alone will come and save us. So for our final table talk today, I wanted to first mention Isaiah. Now in chapter 2 there is talk of all people and all nations turning to God for their salvation. As a result, mankind will get rid of their weapons of war because we will be living in peace. The book of Esther gives us hope, and hope is easy to see because we know the end of the story. But life around us looks very dark and dangerous today. But are you able to gain hope from these passages? And let me ask this, what if this great correction, what if the proverbial death of Haman doesn't happen in our lifetime? Will we be disappointed, or will we cling to that hope? So talk about that amongst yourselves, pray for each other, have a great weekend, and we'll see you one more time next week. Thank you.